and welcome to Highbrow, Lowbrow. I'm your host, Shaun. With me here is Ron Sensei. Each week we get together to discuss a well-regarded, highly received film against a cheesy blockbuster.
Basically, an artsy-fartsy film versus a mindless good time.
So this week, every week one of us chooses which category we want to delve into. And this week it was Ron's choice. So Ron, what do you end up choosing for movies?
This week I chose Kung Fu.
Kung Fu. So he said it was Kung Fu.
Well, yeah.
But what he meant was martial arts. However, let's go right into my choice, the highbrow choice, which was a 2019 film called Shadow. Ron?
Cheers.
Cheers. Directed by Zhang Yimou, Shadow is set in the Chinese dynasty era. To finally achieve victory over a rival kingdom, a brilliant general devises an intricate plan involving his wife, a lookalike, and two kings. Ron, what did you think of this highbrow film?
This is the correct way to do a highbrow film. Like a lot of artsy-fartsy bits, but not meaningless. Not like in this age of freedom of speech, you know, you don't have to code shit, right? A lot of nice shots, a lot of these kind of meditative shots, but it doesn't dwell on it too much. It's not high up in its own fucking fart, right? It just is. It still focuses on the narrative and just the setup of everything. It really sets up the duel towards the end. In fact, there's not much action really that's happening. It spends its time developing the characters, even the characters that's not on screen yet. You know, the what's his name? The General Yang Kang.
Yang Kang, I think it is.
Something like that. Anyway, I love the fact that it spends its time fulfilling the whole dramatic aspects of things, but still maintaining that traditional kung fu master, the special moves and the little tricks, and you know, at the same time you have these different schools of fighting techniques and the two kingdoms that are kind of battling for each other. One gripe that I do have is that the king doesn't really make sense. His motivation is like, is he a bumbling idiot coward, or is he a scheming kind of, he knows really what's happening, but then not really? He goes back and forth to it, and so he's just like, okay, first he's like selling his sister and then he's gonna cry. First he's like really being duped and he's just not concerned about things, and then suddenly he knows and he's not, after all it was all his plan. That part was kind of like weird and it didn't make sense to me. But everything else was really awesome. The princess to me was the most badass character. Her acting was insane. She didn't have much screen time, but when she's on screen, she's acting like a brat and she never really changes. But then she proves you know, so this is like taking a trope and then expanding on it. You know, this is what genre filmmakers really do very well. If you're a genre filmmaker, take notes, because they take a trope and then they don't change it, but then they expand, and towards the end you're like, wow. Yeah, to me it's a great kung fu martial arts film. It's not really kung fu, it's not really historically accurate. But I love the fact that they did it that way, because it's not supposed to be historically accurate. It's supposed to be martial arts, kung fu, flying and spectacles and armors and different kung fu, different fighting styles, just some wild shit. But then it was artsy-fartsy enough, classy enough to actually pull it off and still deliver the goods. I love that. This is the way to do an artsy-fartsy film. Be artsy-fartsy all you want, but then deliver the goods. Don't leave us with blue balls. Don't leave us with blue balls.
I sort of have to disagree with the whole idea of it being feeling very highbrow. I think it does have highbrow elements to it. I think the way the imagery associated with it did have some elaborate set design and distinctive coloring, and just very specific framing of shots. But then I don't know if there was necessarily anything that felt like super expansive on it. I have to compare it. Like I wanted to do, or was thinking of doing, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, because I feel like that's probably one of the best kung fu movies of all time. But
that's even more technically an action-packed.
Oh yeah, no, I agree.
This,
I agree.
Right?
But then I felt like the characters were developed in this film, but I don't know if it went in ways that I wasn't expecting, or went in ways that were really, like, they were in depth, but they were more focused on the intrigue and certain elements of the intrigue. The only character that was really sort of heavily examined was the lookalike character, but sometimes his motivations were pretty unclear. So it was really hyper focused on the intrigue. Who's going to betray who loves another person or this person. And I think if you look at like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, you can definitely see that there is a sincere sense of betrayal and love and loss depicted in that film that I felt was missing a little bit in this film. Everyone was just trying to get the one up on another person. And I think it's even sort of demonstrated with the main character, because he's trying to retain some sense of somebody that actually like really cares about him, or he's trying to like identify who that is, but ultimately he finds nothing. He just sort of has to end up relying on himself, which I think is a somewhat decent message, but I don't feel like it was illustrated to the point where I really connected with it. And then the action, I thought the action was pretty strong. It was very artistic and very elegant, but I didn't feel like it was elevated. Like, I think in terms of most action movies, it's like better than like most of them. But in the top tiers of action, I'm sort of looking for that next level, that next step, and I think it sort of comes close to going there. But I feel like all the things have been done before in other movies that this fellow has done.
I think it's the gimmick of the umbrella. Like, not a lot of kung fu films really did that. And the fact that they were riding like a bunch of skateboards was the really kind of part that, I mean, even in the trailer, you're like, whoa, I've never seen anything like that. But yeah, Shaun is correct. I feel like if you look at Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, it's kind of like, it's a very high bar, because it's got that story, but it's also got the action part, where it's so fast, but then when you look at it, you're like, oh wow, like there's some technicalities there that's happening. Here, I think it blew its load a little too early, because when they did the whole how to disarm the staff wielder with the umbrella by turning it, and then he loses the grip. That kind of happened, but they kind of subverted it, but not really. I mean, the way it ended was, but to me, the thing is that it still delivered the goods. But anyway, that's what we thought of Shadow. Next up is my pick, The Night Comes for Us. The Night Comes for Us is a 2018 Indonesian action thriller written and directed by Timo Tjahjanto, starring Iko Uwais, Joe Taslim, Julie Estelle, Sonny Pang, Zach Lee, a lot of people that you've seen in Raid, and probably these people are martial artists as well. Yeah, it's just a kick-ass Indonesian action martial arts movie that is really, really trending right now, kind of like Ong Bak, but in the Indonesian flavor of violence. Anyway, Sean, what'd you think of The Night Comes for Us?
So it's not necessarily kung fu.
Well, the other one is not kung fu either.
I mean,
there's no kung fu there.
Like, I would say practicing weapons and stuff. I don't know if you would. What would you call it? What else would you call it?
Well, okay, so when I say kung fu film, it's like this, like long ass drawn battle where you don't really need a fist fight, but you're gonna put a fist fight in there.
Okay.
That's a kung fu film because it's like
Because you can use weapons in kung fu, can't you?
yeah, you can.
Yeah, so they're
Yeah.
using weapons.
But they're not. All
Okay.
I'm saying is like they're not doing. That's not a kung fu move.
Yeah, okay.
But they are. It's a kung fu film because you don't necessarily need to
all right, so
do.
so just to clarify, I feel like
Because if you said martial arts, then you can get like a Steven Seagal or
sure.
you know what I mean. Like that's not really kung fu.
I would say that my film is like the art of like kung fu. Like it's in the art, but it's not necessarily what people traditionally think of kung fu. And people might think more traditionally that Night Comes For Us is a kung fu film, but the art isn't actually kung fu. I think it's some version of Indonesian fighting style, which is like, I don't know, Sayat, I think, but I'm not sure. So whoever wants to can correct us on those things.
I mean, Jackie Chan doesn't really practice kung fu. Bruce Lee doesn't practice kung fu. Jeet Kune Do.
Yeah.
But there are kung fu films, but they're okay. But you get what I mean. Like
Okay.
they're not supposed to fight fist fights, but they will.
Okay. So I thought Night Comes For Us. I've seen this movie before, but I did enjoy it when I first saw it. I think the action is very intense and very brutal. I think the action, I recently watched Jackie Chan's Police Story, and Jackie Chan's general way of fighting is using a lot of items around him and using them very smart. And I think this latest brand of Indonesian fighting does use items in a much more brutal way, where people are stabbed and maimed with like the smallest of items, from like a nail on a board to like a meat cutter in a butcher shop. So this film is really super brutal, super exciting. Just throughout the film, the action is shot really well. It feels very realistic and very painful. The pacing of it is pretty breakneck pacing. It goes from scene to scene to scene, and it's always sort of followed up by action, action, action. And I think that sort of works well for it. The general... Sometimes I feel like the story doesn't completely make sense, but I would say overall that you do strongly identify with the characters' motivations. I would say I even identify with the characters' motivations a little bit more here than I did with Shadow, but I'll talk about that more later. But I did identify with the characters a lot. I related to how the main character... Ito was generally like wanted to save some person. I'm not exactly like, you get that he wants to sort of stop being a killer and sort of move on to a more nicer life or something. But then the bond, the kinship with his friends is really well illustrated. So yeah, I thought it was a very fun film. The action was really great. The story is pretty strong, and the final battle was really intense. So, yeah, overall, I just had a really good time with this film, and I would generally recommend it for sure.
Technically, in terms of action, it's super well done. It looks very brutish. It looks very kind of like it's not choreographed because it's so chaotic. Things happen, and you're not going to predict. It's so messy. Things get so messy, and just how things unfold and how things end, the way things were shot was so masterful. Like there was this scene and they were shooting from a window, and they were fighting, and then he throws the guy out of the window, and then the camera pulls back and actually shoots down, and this is one cut, and then you actually see the guy plummet. Some of the fights are so painful. That European girl and the half Indonesian girl, I think she's half, that was insane. She was like Piccolo. She's like, oh, my fucking, finger is messed up. She just takes it off and throws it away. It was insane. It was fun. But in terms of how it proceeded in terms of the story. If you've seen Raid, it becomes really numbing because you're like, you get desensitized in a way with how much punishment everybody's taking. Like, they take 20 stabs and get shot at, and the realism aspect of it kind of loses its feel because the main characters have sort of a plot armor, or that doesn't apply to them. It only applies to the bad guys. And the motivation of the main character, although understandable, the antagonist is not, which is the best character, Iko Uwais. He was the moral guy, but then he was kind of betraying his friends. He destroyed that Chinese triad guy in the beginning to protect the girls, and then he goes to kill his friends, but it's not until the last minute that he comes to their rescue. Yeah. But then actually then he goes back, and it's just a lot of dilly-dallying, and they didn't really know what to do with him. If this is your first foray into Indonesian, action martial arts films, your jaw will drop. And that's not to say that I'm not impressed. It's very impressive, but at the same time, if you've seen Raid, that's another level. That was the first, and it did it. It's very simple, and in this case, simplicity is king. It's kind of like John Wick. The whole thing will be dedicated to just killing and kicking ass. You cannot have an intricate plot. Not too much, because you don't have time to develop these things. And I felt like The Night Comes For Us didn't really work. I mean, the girl's just there to be there.
Yeah.
Like, she's like, he killed your family and relatives. It's not like in Logan, right? Where X32 or whatever, like the little girl in Logan, she's much more jaded. She has gotten more personality. Yeah. Because she's jaded and she knows how the world is, and this girl is just super, super cliched and just a prototype of, like, she just has to act that way. It never dawned to her that this motherfucker killed my fucking cousins and family and relatives, and now he's saving me. And not only that, I'm being thrown into this, and one time he's dying in the pier, he's got the passport, like, fuck, go, and then suddenly he's like waving goodbye. He's able to stand up because he's gonna do the big boss Bruce Lee shit with a bunch of guns pointed at him towards the end. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I do agree with Ron heavily in terms of, like, that the plot lacking in some fundamental, like, connections. I would say the characters, though, they really do form a sort of poetic, family unit with Ito at the front, and then the other characters sort of forming this weird sort of base with Bobby sort of being this crazy drug addict, like, strong dude or whatever, and Faith being the calm, cool, collected guy who sort of brings everyone together, and then Iko being the young upstart who's, like, made a name for himself. And I think the characters themselves are strong, but then the story around it doesn't necessarily connect them all really well together. Yeah, I feel like there's, like, this weird narrative that I sort of placed, but I feel like most people would place, that Ito and Arian, which is the main antagonist, Ito and Arian's arc is that they're fated to fight because they've been rivals, but not really. They never really.
Not really, yeah.
Yeah, they were never really established as rivals, but the story makes them out to be rivals and sort of puts them in that way. But then
it seems like there's a lot of past in that gang, but that's not really, like you said, like, not established.
It's not established. And
but then, they go on like there is.
But it acts like that. It acts like their emotions portray that sort of deep sense that this battle is fated to happen, even though the motivations behind it are flimsy.
And that's what we thought of The Night Comes For Us. Next one is Verdict.
All right, so what I ended up choosing was The Night Comes for Us. I enjoyed the film a lot. I thought the action was intense. I always think these Indonesian action films ramp it up to the next level and really bring a whole new stage of the game in terms of like fighting style and like brutality and innovativeness. So on those regards, I thought it exceeded well. The characters, even though they didn't make sense with the story per se, they still did have this. They acted well in the sense of the stereotypical themes of brotherhood, fighting against your brother to see who's better, to see who's the best, those sort of ideas. Turning around your life to like be better for like a young person or a vulnerable person. Shadow is a strong film. I did enjoy it, and I think the visuals are great. But there's so many interesting little comparisons and contrasts that made me have issues with Shadow that I wasn't necessarily thinking about. But like with Night Comes for Us, there's so many little intricate pieces of the cinematography and how it moves and how it shakes. And at times I felt like Shadow was almost too clean and almost too pristine. And I know it was supposed to be very painty or like very much like a still image of a thing. But I don't know, it felt almost digital. Like it almost felt like it didn't feel filmic at points. In terms of me being invested in the action, I don't know if I necessarily was or as invested in the action of Shadow as I was in Night Come For Us. And I know that may be comparing apples to oranges, but overall, I just got that much more out of Comes For Us because of the action, the sense of brotherhood, and the character interactions, and just the overall fun factor of it.
It's tough because I love mindless action flicks. And The Night Comes For Us technically is superior because of the way it was shot, the way the action scenes were done. It was super creative, and the choreography is another level. That's something that a lot of filmmakers can kind of like look at and actually see, but at the same time, it's not something you've never seen before. There are other crazier stunts in kung fu films that are way superior. And I couldn't really pinpoint it, but I did connect with Shadow more. So a slight edge to Shadow for me, just because the way the narrative almost seems like a fairy tale, where there's two commanders, and one commander got injured, and in that he put a shadow in front of him, a lookalike, to actually represent his kingdom and actually take that city back. And the only thing that I really give it a lot of credit for is the use of umbrellas. I've never seen umbrellas used that way. And so I was like, okay, wow, that's like, that's very creative. But Shaun is correct in that if you compare it to a lot of action movies, especially the artsy-fartsy ones, if you go Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, it's got nothing against that. However, the fact that they're using a very weird weapon and a lot of rain, the rain is
so much rain.
is a big part of this. It reminds me a lot of Kurosawa films. A lot of rain, a lot of wide shots. I give it to Shadow, but only a slight edge. The Night, if you were to compare this to Raid would have won hands down. The thing with The Night Comes For Us is that it tried to handle too much. It's superior in the action scenes, but it's not like you've never seen anything like that before. Technically savvy, but it's kind of numbing towards the end. You're like, okay, well, I kind of know what's going to happen. Shadow, you're a little bit more intrigued, and you're like, I don't know who's going to come out of this. So, yeah, I give it to Shadow. It's weird.
All right, this is another interesting episode. This time, Ron has picked the highbrow and I have picked the lowbrow. Another switcheroo. But be sure to tune in next time when we try to find out who was right.
Shaun or Ron? See you guys.